Welcome to Thinkin, Bros. I'm Chris.
And I'm Alex.
We're your favorite corner store philosophers trying to figure out life one conundrum at a time. Today we have a very special guest, a returning guest, first returning guest, of course. I'd just like to say, in this time of turmoil, I'm happy that, a Christian, an atheist, and a Buddhist can sit down and have a rational conversation. So it's a pleasure to have you back.
I'm Phil. If
Yes,
you remember from the
They
what
remember.
episode was it again?
I wish I could tell you. Maybe in the 12s or...
What was the title? Desserts. We talked about
Everyone
desserts.
craves dessert.
Right. I didn't know you were Buddhist. That's based.
Yeah. Well, we can definitely get into this during the podcast. So my first question is going to be, well, obviously today's subject is philosophy versus religion. I mean, you can remove the verses and just call it compared to, just as a system of belief. Now, what is specifically, if you're comfortable sharing, specifically your stance on Christianity, I would say.
I'm an Orthodox Christian.
Right, but let's say...
That would be my stance.
Okay, but let's say, okay, how do you see it? Do you see it as, okay, the initial point of the creation of the universe is God, or do you see it as, I really relate to the conclusions, the moral conclusions of Orthodox Christianity? What is exactly your stance in that sense?
That's a good question. About the creation of the universe, that's a really weird place, point of discussion, even among Christians. I think typically atheists think that Christians tend to be young earth creationists who think that God created the earth like 6,000 years ago, and Adam and Eve were the first humans, and there was nothing before that. But many Christians, like legit Orthodox Christians and Catholic Christians, they don't think that. They think the universe is billions of years old, as per the science, and that, some even believe in theistic evolutionism. They think of evolution was a thing, right? So this question of where does the universe come from? First of all, I don't find it that relevant for me personally. It's more about how are these, the first question you should ask yourself is, how are these scriptures relevant to me? Or how is this system of belief relevant to me? Because if you know all these facts about the universe and whatnot, where it came from, but it's not relevant to you, that's kind of like dead religion. So I think the first point is, why does it matter to you? So that's how I approach it generally.
Yeah, I think one of my points was discrepancies, and it's the fact that, if you do consider the word of God to be absolute, which I'm sure is shared among the Christians, and follow the theory of the book of Genesis, how can you reconcile it with, scientific truths? And as you know, like, I'm comfortable discussing it with you because I know you're quite rational in your view. I'm sure you welcome science into your life in that sense. So yeah, I probably was expecting you to say that the relevance of the conclusions of religion is much more important than the, historical theorization. But, I've seen debates online, and whenever, like the existence of dinosaurs is brought up, or, in the 17th century or 16th, when Copernicus was imprisoned for saying that the universe is heliocentric, and that whole opposition, I think that's, honestly, maybe that's the gag reflex I have with the vision of Christianity. Maybe a lot of people may as well, right?
Absolutely.
Just because,
even me, I have it too, to be honest.
Exactly. And I guess, I don't know if this is a good question. Maybe you have something to say specifically about this question, but could you expand on the reconciliation of, okay, I'm a scientific person, but this has value to me, and the fact that, Christianity historically has been pictured as, okay, you must accept our origin of the universe theory, you must accept our conclusions of life, and we're a package deal, and if you oppose geocentrism, you're in prison. Copernicus was, put on a house arrest for saying that the universe is heliocentric, meaning that the sun is the center of the universe. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah. First of all, I want to mention I have the same gag reflex as you. There's nothing that makes me cringe more than the type of Christianity which is wrong, in my view. A type of Christianity which led to the sentencing of Copernicus, etc. And so now you're asking me, well, how do I reconcile a Genesis story that tells a certain story about how the universe was created? How do I reconcile that with not just scientific conclusions, but with a scientific mindset that allows you to investigate into the nature of reality and investigate into, theories that might go against what Scripture says, right? I think we should totally be open to investigate those questions. But how do I answer that directly? It's tough, because the Bible is a cryptic book in some places, right? It's not like it's just what the Bible says. Okay, let me restart that thought. I think that biblical scripture, if you're someone who's new to Christianity, you're just reading the Bible and you say, oh, okay, it says in Genesis that God created the earth and then this happened. If you're just trying to go about understanding it by yourself, you're likely to be way, way off track. Because the Bible, first of all, is a very old book. There are many contentions there are some expressions in there that come from the Hebrew that you might not necessarily understand if you're not well read in that literature. And so if you just read the Bible by yourself, you might end up with a theory that's totally different from what the church preaches. So that's why I think the Bible cannot just be read. It has to be interpreted through a certain lens, through, in my view, the Orthodox lens, the interpretation of the church. And when you're talking about, I don't know about Catholicism, I don't know where they stand on this. I know that Pope John Paul released some kind of statement concerning theistic evolutionism, and they said in the end, oh yeah, we recognize we can update our understanding of Scripture based on the discoveries we make in the world, because the Bible is the Word of God. It is the true Word of God, and therefore if we find something wrong in it, that's because we've been reading it wrong, essentially. And so there is a little bit of that in the church. Yeah, that's what I'll say for now.
Yeah. So I mean, flexibility or openness of mind. I mean, these are universal things that make you a good human, and certainly in religion it wouldn't be different. A person who can still be open-minded about that. I think my initial concern was just that the conclusions with which you agree and that seem like a good path to follow in life, which in my recent discovery of some Christian thank you. Christian preachings, I've also discovered a lot of wisdom. But the thing I saw it as, and maybe those interpreters of religion that you perhaps now I'm discovering have something against, not to put words into your mouth, but something like that.
Sure.
See those deductions and those conclusions and that wisdom as specifically a logical deduction of the theory of creation, right? If the initial point number one is, God created the universe, blah, 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 then as using deductive reasoning, the only way to accept the final points is also to accept the initial premise. And that's why I saw, dinosaurs, I guess, as a challenge to that, because it kind of interrupts the thing and it says, look, okay, you're not accounting for the evolution part. Now, I love to, wrongfully put percentages to things, but I guess in my experience, I'd say some hardcore Christians would be of the opinion of no, you know what? It's just clips that I saw online of people debating whether the dinosaurs existed and about what do you call it? Conspiracy theories of, well, you're just seeing bones in a museum. It's like, what is your proof? Like, drawings of a T-Rex with tiny arms. How stupid does that look? But I guess that doesn't have much relevance, especially because your view is like that. So we're not going to discuss, every type of Christian belief. I think we're going to stick to what you know.
But I still think that's important, because the image that Christianity get is precisely this image, that it's a religion that's largely centered on a different understanding of history, that's centered on a belief that the earth is 6,000 years old, a belief that there were no dinosaurs, a belief that, all these things, when really that's not the main point, in my opinion. And even this very idea that God created the universe is a strange one, because in one sense, you can think of it as, 14 billion years ago, expansion started weight, and that started with God, setting it into motion. But when you think of God, like when you really think about it, God being beyond time, what does that mean? If God is beyond time, you can't really place him at the beginning of time and then him setting time into motion. There are some Orthodox writers who describe God more as continually creating the universe. And that still puts God at the beginning of the universe, because in a sense it wouldn't exist if he weren't here, but he's always creating it because he's outside of time. Yeah, I don't know. This may be deep theology, and I don't know if this is the direction you wanted this to go in, but just to give you a taste of the thinking that goes on. And this is Orthodox thinking, this isn't like, liberal churches trying to reform Christianity. This is old Orthodox thinking. That's just not mainstream because many people don't read into it that much. So.
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter what direction this takes, because everything is interesting. Like, I've recently talked to a physicist, and he informed me about the fact that we've been mapping the universe for the past 20 years. We're sending light rays or something, and there are literally boundaries to the universe, walls that light cannot go through, and that are the limits of the matter of the Big Bang. And when I asked him, okay, if you're telling me that the universe is finite in that way, can you account for what is on the other side? And he said, well, answering that is purely philosophical, because we have nothing in our knowledge that can go faster than light, and light doesn't go through that thing. So it's like some kind of wall. I mean, I couldn't believe him. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how this finitude puts it into perspective, because I still think you're telling me it's a wall. Well, what does a wall separate? Something from something else. Okay, if on the other side there's something we don't know, or maybe, I don't know, another universe where there's even emptiness, that's still call it infinitude. Anyway,
maybe the distance from here to that wall is infinite. So let me explain what I mean by that. Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to go this way, but how space-time curves in weird ways and shit happens. So apparently when an object crosses, you have a black hole and you have the event horizon, which is basically the point of no return, let's say. And so apparently when you see an object going toward a black hole, you never see it cross the event horizon from our perspective. It's asymptotic in a way. Asymptotes is like a function that forever approaches a line and is always approaching it but never quite crosses it. Maybe there's an idea of that, of the wall. Maybe light is always going toward the wall, but it slows down and it bends in some way such that it's infinite but finite at the same time. I don't even know how to make sense of that, to be honest, but
yeah, and
it's maybe not just a glass wall as we tend to think of it.
Yeah, I mean, I also doubt how much physics can know at this point, but
sure, yeah.
I think it's, as you said at the beginning, the finitude or the infinity of the universe doesn't have much incidence on the conversation, and I'd love to have the conversation, but again, I'm sure we'd be speculating way too much for it to be relevant. So now, let's switch it up completely. I would love for this to follow something logical. Unfortunately, I wasn't as prepared. So we're going to go to the problem of heaven, okay?
Mm-hmm. Just for for precision's sake, I'm not sure I would describe myself as an atheist completely. I'm probably like agnostic, and I'm very interested in religion. But a couple episodes ago, we were on some subject. What were we talking about? Philosophical paradoxes. Well, it wasn't about the problem of evil, but I was thinking about heaven and how the conception of heaven is, it's after you die. If you lived your life well, everything is in heaven is good, and it's only like happiness and everything is just good. But the way I conceive of my life and why life is enjoyable is that there is some challenge, right? And that it's not all breezy and all relaxed. I feel like if I didn't have problems in my life, I would be miserable. And, in times where I don't have challenges to overcome and I don't have to work hard, I fall into this like existential crisis of like, oh my God, I have no purpose. And I was thinking of heaven and how, I don't know, heaven is what, eternal and all happiness. And to me, in my life, while I'm still a mortal and here on this earth, it seems like not desirable. What's your view on heaven?
My view is that heaven, kind of by definition, is something that in the final analysis you would prefer to any other alternative. And so if you have a certain image of heaven that seems repulsive to you for whatever reason, I would say that there's something you're missing about
refined it enough. Like,
yeah,
heaven
maybe
is just the ideal state for me, whatever that is.
And part of the reason too is that when you're in heaven, you're not the same person as you are now. By which I mean this. For an alcoholic, it's hell to be without alcohol. But in heaven, there's no alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of idea. And so if you have an image of heaven where you feel like you're missing something, then it's either because A, heaven is not really the ideal place, or B, because there is something in you that's preventing you from being able to appreciate heaven. And I take it by faith that heaven is, by definition, something that in the final analysis you will prefer. Just like an alcoholic, in the final analysis, he would prefer to be sober and without alcohol, even if he cannot imagine how he would be happy in that world. You see what I mean? And so to me, the way I imagine heaven is that it's a place such that everyone's disposition is such that they enjoy an environment which is not conducive to a bunch of unnecessary suffering, like war and torture and whatnot.
I see. Does this make sense? Humans are cast out of the garden because the original sin is eating the apple from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that's related to human pride and thinking they can dictate morality, in the sense that there's no objective morality. Like, God doesn't decide, I can decide, and that's their pride. And in heaven, which we were cast out of, there wouldn't be any debate on morality, right? The conception is that there's a universal morality that everyone agrees on, and that's dictated, by God. That's universal.
You term it in you put it in terms of objective morality, but I would phrase it slightly differently. I would say that the eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil is not just them questioning God's morality. Primarily, it's them thinking that they can do better than what already is, which is kind of like the same statement, but I'm phrasing it differently.
Yeah.
It's like they are in a perfect place, but they imagine that they could do better. In a way, that's what a lack of gratitude is. And in a way, that's what leads people to doing things that are subpar. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you've been told that let's say you're in university, you're trying to get good grades, and you're being told that the right path for you to take in this moment is to focus on your studies, hang out with some friends at school, spend time with your family, but stay away from alcohol, stay away from porn, stay away from wasting your time in ways that are not productive. So then you say, okay, I can get great grades just by following this path. But then you get the intrusive thought that goes, oh, what if I could do better? What if I can drink and watch porn and waste my time and still get that ideal life that I want?
Yeah,
You know, what if I could have my cake and eat it too? I'd say that's the thought that led to the eating of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. And that's the thought. Thinking that you can make things better, paradoxically, is what makes things worse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think heaven is a place where people are grateful for what exists already and are shrewd enough to realize that they can't do better than this. And that's the ideal world, so to speak.
Yeah, that has a lot of links with what what you wanted to talk about, and that the stance of, you know, philosophers. And I actually don't know what Nietzsche's stand on the death of God was. I think there's many interpretations where some people, okay, so famously Nietzsche famously said that God is dead, meaning the faith was dying out, and as science was evolving, there's less and less chance and less people that stick by religion. And I think there's many interpretations of him interpreting it as a great tragedy, or him saying, "Oh, you know, we're free from." One of the metaphors he uses is like, there's a sun that the earth turns around, and it's as if the earth is us and the sun is God, and it's as if the sun disappears, there's no gravity holding us back, and we're just adrift in space. And, you know, is that horrible in the sense that we're lost, or is that good because we can be Übermensch and invent our own morality? And I think that's where philosophy comes in.
In a way, your conception of heaven is the most reasonable, but it's because, you know, I wanted to title the episode Phil versus Philosophy, but it seems as though it should be titled Phil on Philosophy, because you have a very philosophical conception of your faith, because you're simply saying what we're all thinking intuitively. Heaven is by default, doesn't matter, you know, how you describe it as a storyteller, it is the desirable state to be in. But I like that, and we can certainly be content with that. But I guess there are two things I would say. First of all, as a person who maybe would deny the afterlife, I would say the way you describe it is, to me, a very big parallel, such that it cannot be denied and both can be seen as equal, that heaven is on earth, because the person who has learned those values that are by default in heaven is the only person who can be happy on this earth, is the grateful one, is the non-pretentious one, is. So I think my ultimate point with heaven was, hey, but what if all those things you're saying are true, and it doesn't even have to be a, you know, paradisiac conception in the skies. It can be here, and the only thing you would have to do is fight that human instinct. And just, I'm sure you can say a lot about that, but just as another thing is, okay, if that's heaven, and you see a discontinuity between me now and me there, because all of the things that I could do now as a sinner aren't even a bit available to me there, I feel like there's still something to say about what Alex said, in the way that the pleasure, as St. Augustine said, right? The pleasure comes from the fact that you had such a possibility to fail. And when you take away the possibility to fail from me, it stripes me of my humanity. So it's just, I think in your conception of heaven, although intuitive, it takes away from something quite human. And you did point out a certain discontinuity for you, right? Like, hey, there I'm going to be grateful for everything. Well, hey, that's not very human, is it?
I think it is. It's just that this is a tough ontological difference, but I think there's a difference between being devoid of free will, meaning that you do good because that's the only possibility that's available to you, or you always do good because that's the kind of person you've become. And those are the choices that you always take, because either by faith or either because you're aware of it. And so I think I never really thought of the kind of the kind of person. I never thought of this question, like, do you have the choice to do bad when you're in heaven? I never thought of it that way, to be honest. I just think that it's something you come to by your own free will at the end of the day. So I don't see that much discontinuity. We, as we are right now, humans, flawed human sinners with free will, with the possibility to do evil, as we are right now, we can become holy. We can become like Christ. Theosis, that's the whole point of it at the end of the day. We're not like the angels who can only do good. We're human. And that's why it says even in the Bible that Christ was above the angels, because he was tempted, but just like us by sin and all these things. I know there's kind of a debate about whether Christ could have done evil or not, and I don't know. I've never really read anything on that, but that's how I see it. If that answers your contention, I'm not sure it does.
Yeah, kind of, because it's almost like you're saying, okay, the person who deserve heaven are going to be the ones that don't experience the discontinuity because they've reached the holy status on earth, and from there on out, they're just going to heaven and being the, I don't know, perfect humans, if I may. Whereas if you had taken someone who is a sinner and hasn't mastered their free will, there would be a discontinuity in placing them in heaven, because then they would have to kind of deterministically stop doing all the bad things. Right?
Sorry, can you say that last part again?
They would, okay, if you put the people who don't deserve heaven in heaven, there would be the discontinuity, because they would deterministically be stopped from doing all the sinful things, because now they're in heaven and that's impossible. Whereas the people who, have reached the, I don't know how you call the status, but
theosis, we can call it.
Theosis are the people who aren't going to be experiencing a discontinuity because they've already achieved it on earth.
Right.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, so something like that. There's even this idea, I don't know how widely held this is, but there's this idea that the light of heaven is the flames of hell. It is the same thing. It's just that depending on who you are, if you're an alcoholic and you're put in an environment that doesn't have any alcohol and is full of peace, you're not going to like that, even though that's heaven. You know what I mean? There's kind of that idea going on, potentially. And another thing I should mention is that you seem to talk about heaven as if it's primarily a place you go to after you die. Like, you live your life on earth, you die, and then if you deserve it, you go to heaven. But I think that the main point of the biblical story is not that. That may be a point, but I think the focus is on bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth. And there's a fantastic Christian resource that I love for this. It's a YouTube channel. They're called The Bible Project, led by Tim McKay. I think I got his name right. And they talk about this, and their stances are mostly orthodox. Most Christians agree with them on many things. But he has a TED Talk where he talks about how many people think that Christianity is about doing the right thing while you're on earth, then you die, then you go to eternal bliss in heaven. But actually, it's about bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, says Jesus Christ. And when I say that it's about making the world a better place, that sounds kind of, I don't know, that rings cringy to many Christians because it sounds secular. But I truly think that is what it is.
I'm pretty sure it settles our problem with it, right?
Sorry to disappoint. I'm not as spicy as you might have expected.
Yeah, the way I think I got interested in religion is like being interested in psychology. I ran into Jordan Peterson. He talks about the psychological significance of the biblical stories, and he has a book called Maps of Meaning, and he conceives of the world in that book. Like he says, like the world can reasonably be conceived as in two ways. One way is like the physical sense, where I can touch this is metal, I can describe it, it's cold to my hand, something like that. And then there's another part, which is not physical, it's about meaning, like what things mean to us. And he calls that like the world of myth, and stories are meant to delve into that and to explore the meaning of things. So like if I only describe the physical attributes of the microphone, it's not the same thing as saying like, oh, I definitely am not gonna like throw this across the room because it's valuable, it's meaningful to me, like I need it right now. It's like two different ways of looking at the same objects.
Right.
And the way to interpret stories and the Bible, and the way I can reasonably approach the Bible despite contradictions in it or disagreements with science and all of that, is that I want to approach it. I don't know that much about it, so if I read into it, I want to approach it in the sense that there's stories that really smart people, clearly because it's the most popular book and religion is really popular for a long time, it like led the world. You approach it in a way that like you approach it with respect, in the sense that those stories have something to say about human nature, and the people that wrote it knew something that maybe people forgot, and you try to get lessons from those stories. I don't know where I was going with this. It's just not the same conception as science.
Right.
Science is there to describe how the world is physically and causality, why this happens, and the Bible is there to like tell us what is meaningful, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. The Bible is there to tell you. It speaks in terms of what matters. Let's put it that way. When it talks about the kingdom of heaven, it doesn't talk about the marble on the pillars. It talks about a place you want to be, no matter how it is. People don't talk about whether Jesus was blonde or brunette or white-haired or whatnot, although there's a description of that in Revelations. But that's not the point. The point is the Spirit. And even in the Bible, there is this distinction in reading the scriptures. You can read it, you can read the letter of the law, or you can have the spirit of the law, so to speak. And so I think I love, like, don't get me wrong, I love Jordan Peterson because he infuses the Bible with the spirit of the law, which I think some people might be missing a lot. They read it as a historical document. That's not what it is. It's important to know why it's important. On the other hand, though, the Orthodox Church does strongly, it is based on the historical resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that's not something that Jordan Peterson has ever explicitly affirmed. When people ask him, did Jesus rise from the dead, for example, Jordan Peterson tends to answer, well, Jesus is always resurrecting. And, this is a template for us to resurrect, to spiritually kill ourselves and make sacrifice, and then we'll resurrect to a brighter day, and absolutely, that's a whole lot of spirit there, but an important chunk, the historical resurrection of Jesus, is missing from Jordan Peterson's lecture. So I'd say that you can't really just take Jordan Peterson and then call yourself a Christian because you agree with his philosophy. I mean, I don't want to tell people what they should call themselves or not, but I'm just saying that there is a distinction there. Nonetheless, I respect him a lot for the spirit that he puts into it. Like, okay, to give you a concrete example, if someone doesn't believe in the resurrection, let's say an atheist, and then through logical arguments, historical arguments, evidence, etc., a Christian comes to convince him that Christ has resurrected, then the worst thing that can happen is for that atheist to say, okay, now I'm convinced, but so what? Right? That's so what. That so what has to be addressed. It's not primarily what is the history of this. Primarily, it's okay. Even if this was true, even if he did resurrect, why would that matter? Why is that relevant to me? How does that play into my life? And I think, yeah, that's the spiritual side of it, which I think is important.
Okay, yeah, I think that's the way I see religion, and the way I make sense of it, and how I think of it as useful is like, for me, who doesn't know much about religion, is like God is like an abstraction of what is absolutely perfect. And the sense in which God is in us all is that we have the potential, and we, like, if we look within, like, we know what we're supposed to be doing. to get to heaven.
Yeah, the letter of the law is written in our hearts. It says in Leviticus.
That makes so much sense to me.
And the
We
New
have
Testament.
we have a moral compass leading us to where we want to go, and that for me is God. That's how I interpret it. But then I want to ask you this then, because
Mhm.
I think what Chris was bringing up with inconsistencies with science about dinosaurs and everything, a person resurrecting would go into like inconsistencies with science, and so I'm not too informed about it. So you're saying like you believe that Jesus Christ was a guy that 2,000 years ago resurrected, like came back from the dead?
I have to be perfectly honest. I
Yeah.
have trouble believing that.
Okay.
And I think many Christians do, but the attitude with which we approach that doubt is what makes it different.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can say, I have doubts about it, therefore is wrong. Or you can say, and this sounds very twisted from a modern secular perspective, but you can say, I have doubts about it, therefore I have the sin of doubt in my heart.
I see.
And I perceive this doubt, but I don't associate with it. In a way, these are whispers by the devil. And it's a common sin. It has a name. I don't know the name in English, but in Romanian, it's gânduri hulitoare. It's like doubtful thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
This is like a classic thing that even the Desert Fathers struggled with a lot sometimes. Is that doubting the truth of the resurrection and doubting a lot of other things, for example. So that's kind of how I'd classify myself. I'm a Christian who has trouble believing in the resurrection of Christ.
Okay, and you see yourself as sinful because of that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but by the Orthodox standard. That's a weird place to be too. Because it's like, whose judgment do you trust? Your own or the church's? In a way, the church's is not your own judgment, so I recognize that. From my own perspective, my doubt is not sinful. From my own perspective, my doubt is just my doubt. It's, perfectly fine. But nonetheless, this spiritual father, so to speak, that I've put my trust in, which is the church, says, actually, there's something you're missing there.
Mm.
And I guess my attitude towards that is that I'm very open and I'm looking to see where I'm wrong for that. Not because I have any particular reason to think that I'm wrong, but because I have trust. I have faith in my church. And I think faith, there's no way around that. You need faith, which is something it is a very underrated value nowadays, I think. But that's how I operate for now.
I see.
I guess I'd say this leads me to the question of, as a rational person, if you were to imagine a child that isn't introduced to philosophy or religion,
Mm-hmm.
certain type of blank slate, if you will, he would certainly, conceivably come up with the idea of God, right? You give him science, he says, well, okay, what caused that? What caused that? And when you go down the chain, it's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, was there really condensed matter in a completely empty universe, and from that everything created? What's before that? And I understand the idea of God, but as a rational person, and I think this is perhaps my biggest trouble, how do you reconcile the fact that if you the Ricky Gervais joke, if we go back 5,000 years, all the science books stay the same, but all the religion books differ, or none of them are going to be the same? In the sense that, through repeated interpretation, through the vision of the humans of how they conceived of the facts back in the day, or back in year zero, if you remember.
I remember year zero. Yeah.
Good time. Abundance of wine and bread for some reason. So, yeah, the thing about that is, to me, if you put me in the world as a blank slate, I like to think of, as a reasonable but reason-using animal in Aristotelian terms. I like to think of myself as, you know what, I will discover what is good through my reason. And when you put me in front of, a world without religion and philosophy, I could not reproduce the exact teachings of the Christian church.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is specifically, okay, if you see this as a good argument, why Orthodox Christianity.
Why? Okay. I don't see how that ties in. Oh, okay. I see. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Basically, why Orthodox Christianity? That's a good question. Now, typically, a typical way of operating would be for someone to say, okay, I see all these houses. Let me see the value in each of them and let me evaluate them and compare them. And then I'm going to make a decision. Once I've decided and once I'm convinced enough of the doctrine of one of these houses, let's say. But I say that it's not possible. It's just not possible to operate that way. There are so many sects, so many religions, so many houses, so many people that at the end of the day, if you're gonna reason them all out before embarking on them, then that's equivalent to not even embarking on them. It's not, you're not taking a leap of faith. You're just choosing the philosophy that represents your current beliefs the best. And I think that's what a lot of people do, is that they have a certain mindset. They say, okay, I'm looking for a based philosophy. I'm looking for a based religion, a based group of people to associate with. And then they say, these ones are the most basedest. and that's kind of how they choose it. And so in a way, it's when you do that, the one that you choose, I'm not saying that it's wrong to do that, but I'm just saying when you do that, you are not how can I say, you're not being mentored by that philosophy anymore. You're just selecting the one that agrees with you in everything you say, kind of like someone who chooses a therapist, the therapist who makes them feel the best. You know what I mean? Not exactly, but in that direction. And so now you're asking me, why orthodoxy? And I have to say it has not very much to do with how much I agreed with it going into it. Although it has a little bit to do with that. I saw its teachings in general. I looked into the saints. I thought, okay, this is something I can roll with. It had some degree of resonance. And then I say, okay, well, the way I'm going to discover this is by going into it and living it. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I think that I just thought of this. I think that question was birthed through the fact that a lot of people are born into religions and stay with them.
Mm-hmm.
Especially a lot of devout people, because I guess, the familial influences, everything like that. And that's where, as a reasonable being who, is a philosopher, I see a lot of trouble, and I would go the path that you described that you shouldn't go, which is, okay, let me develop a philosophy like any other philosopher would from any first principles that I believe, which, considering the speculative nature of it, wouldn't be God, right? Let me come up with conclusions and then match those conclusions to whatever religion there is. Now, as a rationalist, I would say that's an idea I'm comfortable with, and I understand that precisely the problem with that is the leap of faith. And the leap of faith is everything, right? The leap of faith is I'm putting myself into the arms of God, and He's going to carry me, and that's where you get the biggest payoff and the biggest risk.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? And yeah, it's just I have a problem with the fact that, okay, you were born into religion. It's like nationalism, I'd say, right? You think your country is the best because you were accidentally born into it. Is there something to that bothers you a little bit, in the sense that, especially people with strong ideologies, perhaps Muslims, that, they're born into the religion and then they're going to defend it in the eyes of other people who disagree with it. But hey, like, I understand that you found happiness in it, but do you understand that if you were accidentally birthed into something else, you would think for completely different things? Is there something to that for you?
Absolutely. And I've thought that a lot before even deciding to be on the Orthodox path, was that, yeah, if I was born Muslim, I'd probably be Muslim. If I was born something else, I'd probably be something else. And in fact, I recognize that part of the reason I turned to the Orthodox Church is because I was born in it. That's actually the reason. Part of the reason. So Is there a danger to that? There's definitely a danger to that. Of course. There's always a danger involved with you putting trust in anything. And I think, what is the remedy to that? Now we're getting deep, because I don't know if there is a remedy necessarily. I mean, think about it. You're born and you have 1,000 questions being thrown at you every minute. That's what life is, basically. It's having questions thrown at you all the time, constantly. And you don't have time to think about all of them. So one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, which questions do I prioritize? Which questions do I figure out for myself, and which ones do I delegate to other people? And if I say that I decided to delegate this set of questions to other people, and then you're telling me that there's a risk to that, of course there's a risk to that. And is there a remedy to that? If there's a perfect rational remedy to that, then you're not really delegating other questions. There's always going to be a piece of the unknown there that leaves the door open to colossal mess-ups, screw-ups. So what do you do about that? I don't know. Like, I wish I could give you a rational answer for every decision I make. But there isn't. I just kind of try to tread carefully. I try to balance my faith with reason. I try to, if there was something absolutely outrageous that the church preached, I would probably have a problem with it. And who knows if I would still remain in the faith. Whether you want to conceptualize that as healthy questioning or as sinful doubting, who knows what's going to happen. And so far, the way I've tried to make sense of it is the following. Because originally I thought Christianity was very stupid. And so the way I got into it is to say, okay, well, there's billions of people who believe this, strangely enough. So is there a way that I can read these teachings? Can I read them in a way that makes sense? In other words, can I do the radical opposite of a straw man? Can I steel man these doctrines so hard that they make sense from every possible point of view? And I think if you do that, you find a lot of wealth, for real, in religion, in no matter who you are. It's just that religion is often portrayed as something disgusting, something that's about dinosaurs, something that's about this, that, things that are loud, because that's what you see on the media. You see loud things. You see people that are easy to get frustrated at, because that's what gets clicks. Not just in religion, but with, LGBT issues and racial issues. You just see the worst racists, the worst cases of everything, So that's how I'd answer that question.
Yeah, that's good. I guess my specifically my thing about nationalism was, for you, I understand, right? For you, and I know that during our last episode, the way you presented your faith, you said, I think you quoted Dostoevsky, and then you said, it doesn't matter if you believe in Christianity or not, here's wisdom. And that I like. The steel manning I like for you. My problem is with the people that, I guess the point I called is framework of administration. And it's, what I love about Buddhism is that, in fact, there is no Buddhist master before a Buddhist student. Well, there's no Zen master before a Zen student approaches the master and says, I want to learn from you. You have something I want. There's wisdom in you. And then the master is going to actually deny him. He's going to say, no, I'm not taking you on as a student, blah, blah, blah. And the way I see the process is, well, actually, the wisdom of Zen Buddhism is that there was never anything to answer at all. Okay. And the way to approach that is, there's a story about Eka, and he went to his master. He kept getting denied, and he came back stronger and stronger. And one day he cut off his left arm and presented it to the master and said, there's nothing more that I want than truth. And here's the proof of it. And the master said, Bodhidharma said, okay, what do you want to know? And Eka says, I can't pacify my mind. can you pacify it for me? And the mind is the mind heart in Zen Buddhism. So it was here. And then Bodhidharma says, okay, well, bring out your heart mind before me and I'll pacify it. And then Eka says, well, when I look for it, I can't find it. And Bodhidharma says, well, then it's pacified. Let that sink in. So the way I interpret it is, hey, you're my student. I'm going to deny you. And then one day you're going to sacrifice so much that, if I may use the expression, it's my best expression for it, is you're going to run out of fucks to give. And you'll realize that the truth of the universe is just to be. And it always was just to be, because you're the universe. Again, I'm synthesizing a lot of Zen Buddhism. I hope it's making sense. And I forgot where I was going. Oh, okay. And the beauty of that, I think, is the choice part, is the free will part, is that person has such wisdom that I am going to run after him to find out that wisdom. And I feel like because now youth is associated to lack of wisdom, and older people are seen as wise or whatever. And I'm sure perhaps if you follow on your path, maybe you will have disciples, is all I wanted to say. But because of the way that you approach philosophy, religion, because of the way you administer it, because you're like, I have found my path to wisdom. I can explain the framework to you, but I'm never gonna, hand out flyers on the street to promote, correct me if I'm wrong, but to promote.
No, I wouldn't. That's not really an orthodox attitude to start with. That's more something Protestants do.
Okay.
In general.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe that's kind of the problem that I have with it. And here I found a Bible code that relates to this, and it's Matthew 7:6. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces. And again, I know that you've dissociated from maybe the forceful history of Christianity, but this is something that you can still kind of see. If you have found your wisdom and you are that happy, where does the going around and showing it to other people come in? Do you want to protect them from sin? How much of an incentive is there to that? And I know I'm talking a lot, but one of the ways that the assassinations of when they burn people for being atheists. Anyway,
witch hunt.
Maybe something like that. And a way to rationalize that is, look, I don't want you to burn in hell, so I'm going to first try to reason with you to turn you on the right path. And when that doesn't work, I'm going to, I don't know, imprison you for being atheist. And then when that doesn't work, I'm going to burn you at the stake in the hope that in that moment you're going to have one last act of, a revelation, and you're going to accept God and something like that. And it was almost I saw someone explain it as not altruistic, but in a way where, look, I found my path and here I'm going to enforce the path on others. So again, coming back to the nationalist, it's a long way, but you know how maybe you've experienced this because Quebec is Quebec, but you know how the guy who's never left Quebec is going to defend it as the greatest nation and the French language is so awesome and everything? Yeah. I'm sure you've heard that, right?
Of course.
I have a lot of trouble with those people, and I think there is a way, and I'm sure you dissociate from it, to see religion that way, right? Like, I found the path to salvation, not my path to salvation, the path.
Yeah.
And therefore I'll enforce it upon you.
Yeah. Do
you completely deny that kind of thinking?
I absolutely tend to. I think I'll present you a quote that kind of summarizes how I operate. There's a quote by I forgot which saint, but he said that basically he's like very focused on humility and being humble, and he says that really the only way you can teach someone, the only advice you have to give on this earth, you can barely save yourself, forget about other people. The only advice you have to give is to tell people where you have fallen in the past so that they don't fall in the same holes. That's really the only solid piece of wisdom you have to give on this earth. And I believe that. And I think I think there is a great, ironically, there's a great, many Christians might disagree with me, but I don't care. I think there's a great arrogance in saying that you found the one true path, and in being so confident in that you're willing to torture people because of your conviction. And ironically, the people with this kind of conviction, sometimes they think of themselves as very humble, because they say, well, I'm not using my own judgment. I'm just passing on the wisdom of the scriptures. You know, they're like, don't look at me. I'm not the smart guy here. It's the scripture. Therefore, I'm humble, right? But I think the hypocrisy in that is that, well, it may not be your wisdom that you're transmitting, but nonetheless, you for yourself judged that this tradition is authentic. You for yourself judged that these scriptures are true. In a way, you think you have the power to discern, if not the truth, who holds the truth, which is just as great a power, in my opinion. So I think there's a great arrogance in that attitude. And I also wanted to point out some similarities between, because what you said about the Zen tradition shocked me, and how similar it is to Orthodox tradition. Because in Orthodoxy, this is something that's less in other denominations, but in Orthodoxy we have spiritual fathers, starets, which only appears when a student comes to him. He's not a guy advertising his services or anything. And in fact, it might be a person who never even intended on being a starets. It's usually students who come to him, and students who have to come repeatedly because he tends to reject them. Really, the only piece of wisdom I can give is to tell people where I've fallen in the past and to reason things out with people.
100%. I think I've observed that pattern in life as well, because, you know, a lot of people are result oriented, and, you know, it's a symptom of a complexifying society and our categorization of, this person is in a position that I want to be in, and therefore I should follow them. But here's the difference. A lot of people, for example, I don't know, I guess if you didn't look into the history of Donald Trump and saw him as the multimillionaire that he is, or maybe billionaire, I don't know, you would tell yourself, okay, I want to be in that position, let me follow these principles. But then you hear the thing about small loan of $1 million, and then you're like, wait, but we're not at the same starting position. So the pattern that I'm trying to identify here is just, but before you follow someone's patterns that led him into a position that you want to be, make sure they were at the same starting point, because otherwise it's irrelevant. I observed this in the diet world, where a lot of people who start off as overweight look at some principles that people that were always skinny applied to becoming, you know, very, very muscular. Right. And they're like, well, I want to be that guy. I must follow his principles. But your truth path is very different. And, you know, I think that's a pattern that also applies to philosophy. And as you said, or religion, as you said, tell the errors of your past to a person, and if they like the position that you're in, they're going to follow you. That makes sense to me. So, okay, let's get to the spicy stuff, okay? Here, I think that Nietzsche proposes the Übermensch, which... Übermensch, which... do you know about... Anyway, yeah. I have to say it anyway. It is the person who abandons societal moral universals, I guess, standards, norms, and comes up with his own, and that's the only way to, you know, the path to authenticity. I like that, but that's because I started off as a philosopher. Yeah, that's like a zoomer way to put it, to appeal. No, but no, I like that too. Yeah, it's by the way, you know, he says that it's at the top of Maslow's pyramid of just before Maslow. This is the way to self-actualization, bro. I like very much where this is going. Please continue. Yeah, so while Nietzsche was doing flute-guided meditation from YouTube, he discovered the Übermensch. The point is, there is a difference between something that you have recently learned, or maybe have been given as advice, and you know that as wisdom, right? Which is why what I would see a person newly exposed to religion as being, right? And then there's a difference from internal factors that are things upon which you would act under pressure, fast, the things that guide your actions. And that difference is, let's say you're even trying to relearn something. Let's say you want to start nose breathing. Well,
Nose breathing?
yeah, nose breathing.
Okay.
And
You calling me a mouth breather?
all hypotheticals. I'm a philosopher, so.
Got you.
And then in the middle of your of a sports game, that if you've been nose breathing for a week, but during a sports game, you're going to be so exhausted that you're going to go back to your old habits instinctively because you haven't internalized the nose breathing. Bad physical example, but you get the point. So my thing is, and here's the spicy part, my way to reconcile the wisdom of a religion and the practices that to a rational person would seem futile, which is, for example, for Muslims not to eat pork, just rationally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or for, again, Muslims to pray 5 times a day or have the Fajr prayer at 5:30 in the morning, which kind of impedes on your life. And my theory about that is those are synthetic internalization techniques that, because that is the word of someone else and it's not yet internalized within you, you're going to be doing these things that alter your life quite significantly if you are devout. I'm sure any religion has those habits, even going to church, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And those are like synthetic internalization principles that, when under duress, because your lifestyle is led, because every point in time is just 2 hours away from any prayer, let's say, you're going to be guided by those factors.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm saying? Because if I were just a philosopher, I have my fundamental principle, I've deduced my things, it's all in my mind, it's been worked out, blah, blah, blah. But somebody told me some wise stuff. The way to internalize that is to do things of that stuff that perhaps don't make sense to a perfectly rational person. But those are the sacrifices that remind you, hey, that's still the right path, even if your brain doesn't instinctually come to it. Any thoughts on that vision of those things?
Absolutely. And I'm actually really glad you brought this up, because it gives me an opportunity to bring up something we discussed in a recent Bible study. We run Bible studies every Wednesday and Friday, and we were discussing, we read Isaiah chapter 7. And
shout out Bible group.
Shout out Bible verse, Old Testament. But before reading it, I want to preface that I agree that there is a great danger, even from a Christian perspective, even for your own soul, in following something blindly, without the spirit behind it. Actually, that was one of Jesus Christ's biggest pet peeves, even, was that the Pharisees at the time, the Pharisees were the religious authorities, like the Jewish priests of the time, let's say. His problem with the Pharisees was that they followed the rules to the letter, but without much spirit behind it, without seeing the point. And because of this, they would miss a bunch of more important spiritual stuff. So I'm just going to read the verse right here, because this is a perfect example of that in Isaiah 7. For context, it is seen as bad, like sinful, to test God. For example, if you want to, let's say you're asking God for a miracle and you're saying, oh yeah, well, if you really are real, then write Jesus Christ is King on the whiteboard with a flying chalk right now. Asking that of God is sinful, because it's like you're testing him. And in the same way, in the New Testament, at some point, Satan told Jesus to throw himself off the cliff and to tell God to save him. And then Jesus Christ said, no, you're trying to trick me here. That would be testing God, and that's not good. So there's a huge precedent behind a huge taboo behind testing God. And that's the context in which I will read to you now this verse. Isaiah chapter 7, verse 10. Okay, so now the Lord is speaking to King Ahaz. And King Ahaz is in a battle and he is having like some faith struggles. So it says, "Moreover, the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, quote, ask a sign for yourself from the Lord your God. Ask it either in the depth or in the height above. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord." He thinks he's being righteous. But then he said, he being the prophet Isaiah, the Lord is speaking through Isaiah. Then he said, "Hear now, O house of David, is it a small thing for you to weary men, but will you weary my God also?" And here the word for weary is like bullshit. So basically what he's saying is it a small thing for you to bullshit men, but will you bullshit my God also? So essentially Isaiah is calling Ahaz bullshit here. Because Ahaz said, oh, I'm not going to ask for a sign from God because it's sinful, right? He's following the rules. He's doing the right thing. He's doing the orthodox thing. But we see that it's actually BS, because in this moment Ahaz needs a confirmation. He genuinely needs a confirmation from God, and God was willing to provide in that moment. He was just pretending. It's hypocrisy. He's trying to hide his own lack of faith by acting all righteous in this way, by quote unquote doing the right thing. We can take a moment to digest.
If you want to listen to part 2, follow the podcast, and we'll see you next week.